Is this on? Yeah? Okay. What? Oh, man. Wow, I didn't even have to say anything. So welcome, everyone. Great to see this turnout for the lecture tonight. For those of you that don't know me, my name is Gail Fulton. I'm the director of the School of Landscape Architecture. So by way of introducing Chad, this is actually the first of the School of Landscape Architecture fellow projects or performances. Chad's not technically the first fellow, but he's the first one who I guess we've really had the bandwidth in the school to allow for the time to work on this project. So it's a really good moment, I think, for us. Hopefully the first of several fellows to come down the road. But I was watching the setup prior to everybody getting here, and I'm really excited to see what they have produced. I know Chad has been working really hard this semester, so it's a really exciting moment. So again, thanks for everybody being here. For those of you that don't know Chad or much about his work, I'm just going to give you a little background. He's the founder of Chad Manley Practice in Landscape and Building Arts, which is based in Vancouver, BC. He holds degrees in architecture from the University of British Columbia and community design from Dalhousie University, and a professional specialization certificate in ecological restoration from the University of Victoria. His practice traverses a weaving of landscape, architecture, film, and ecological recovery. His built and immaterial work float amongst the complex continuums of culture and nature and reflect ancient and contemporary imperatives within the Cascadian cultural bioregion. He is also the founder, since he has joined us, which was in the fall of 2022. He is also the founder and member of, or co-founder and member of Refugia Design Cooperative, which launched in 2023 with co-founders Thina Tack and Jeremy Magner of the School of Architecture. And together, this group is currently working on their project Junction City Fire Adaptation, which is in Junction City, California. I think they spent a lot of time out there last summer, and I think the plan is to return again this summer to continue that work. And they are also working on a film which is documenting that process, which is called Fire Followers. So as the sole of fellow, Chad's teaching reflects a curiosity in the specific ecologies and legacies of industrial modernity in the Southeast. And for us, he's contributed, enormously, I think, to our curriculum in his role teaching in the regional studio, which he had, big shoes to fill as the River Studio and Riverline project moved into another phase. So Chad got here in early to mid-August, and had to very quickly put together a program. Sound familiar, Faye? And so he's also contributed to our living systems sequence, our history and theory areas, as well as, because of his interest and ability across a wide range of representational media, helped considerably in our rep sequence and just in studio with regard to that. I also think that one of the things that Chad does really well is he helps students ground the theories that we're oftentimes discussing in the classroom, which are in many cases fairly abstract and hard to come to terms with while sitting in the classroom. And Chad has really made an effort to get students out into the landscape to start to think a little bit more in more grounded terms, not to be overly simplistic about those ideas, but to really search out the complexity in the landscape and start to make those things to have maybe more resonance. So he's done this through his work in the regional studio, looking in the region for connections between landscape and music, or landscape and craft, as he and Faye did last fall, but also traveling through the communities in California that are adapted or adapting, having to learn to adapt to increasingly fire-prone conditions in California, or simply venturing out into what might seem kind of prosaic or banal, or in many ways really kind of degraded conditions in the Knoxville area, to look for maybe something that students haven't seen before, or a new way of thinking about those urban ecosystems. So I'm going to take this right out of his bio because I think it's so well worded. But his pedagogy, the way Chad thinks about his pedagogy, is that it encourages contemplation on the understudied and quiet voices of our world, whereby diverse cultural ephemera and ecological phenomena form a basis or ascent towards meaningful conversation. Whether in studio or private practice, empathic collisions are encouraged within the design process, yielding open and non-prescriptive pathways which alternate within the concentrations of rigor and play, hunch and belief, and history and future. So with that, please welcome Chad Manley.
He forgot to remind folks about cell phones. Daniel's going to remind them again. You folks again. There's a lot of sound happening tonight, so I think just in terms of conserving the soundscape, if you could go on airplane, that would be wonderful. Gail, thank you for the introduction. That was wonderful, humbling. I want to just thank everybody for making time on a interesting day to come and to be here tonight in kind of acoustic communion together. I also want to thank Gail and the whole landscape faculty for all of their support, mentorship, inspiration throughout my time here. The life within this building is charmed, and it's been a real privilege to develop a body of work through the vehicle of this 2-year fellowship. And the fellowship is really a fellowship. It's a vessel of many participants, and I want to thank the folks who have gone along this journey with me. Firstly, to the solo graduate assistant Blake Burba for all of her rhino and site drawings, to Seth Hopper, where are you, Seth, who is running sound here today, to my twin brother Jordan for his help with voiceover recording. A huge thank you to Thina Tuck, my colleague in the Refugia Design Collective, who lifted waters behind the scenes to block out and rig the film sequences that you're going to see tonight, and who lent her voice ultimately to the protagonist of First Creek. A deep, deep thank you to Alyssa Clements, who as a graduate assistant and with her many talents helped dutifully to make this project come to life. And finally, to my friend Daniel Kimbrough, who for some reason said yes to my invitation to accompany First Creek with his musical vision, and to really, you just went so far beyond expectations in terms of how I first conceived of how we might interact together. And so I'm just super stoked that you're here with us tonight and that somehow we made something together. So just going to adjust this because I'm short. 1, an introduction to First Creek. Across our contemporary tributaries, bits pour in together to make the riparian soup. The Kroger's rooftop, the hand-painted hood of a hot-rodded hearse, the waxy umbrellas of poison ivy. Each donates a little flood to the muddy rills and concrete tubes that come to define a channel in which takes a name. From all those little bits flow life. Only after amassing from a billion of these myriad pools does Knoxville's First Creek make its way into our urban codex. Modernity, however, through massive engineering, has foreshortened a stream's ontology, an ontology I would call streaminess. Water is an agent unto itself, hydrogen bonded and uncanny, but serves the great connective genetic effluence which comes to define life on Earth. This effluence starts in the pico pools of our neighborhoods, and it entrains itself within the spongy corridors of our urban streams. The watershed, plump, saturated, and leaky, gives life to a myriad of mini monsters, eco-stars, a many-headed serpent. Yet indeed the creek, the river, a benevolent leviathan, and what I'm calling a composite being, has suffered greatly from flood engineering. Channelization in the 19th century ramped up as a means to ease development and ostensibly protect that development from flooding. While the Tennessee and Cumberland River systems and the Southeast more broadly harbor remarkable and globally distinct aquatic life forms, more species of both freshwater mollusk and salamander can be found here than anywhere else. Local flood control measures in Knoxville are very much in line with cities around the world and not at all unique. If we migrate along the 35th parallel, we see that so many places across the world share the same reformation of water, straightened, channelized. Indeed, I grew up drinking water on the West Coast, funneled through dams, and built over unceded Coast Salish territory. We find this in every nation state and just about every culture. In these efforts to arrest water, the baby, however, has very much been thrown out with the bathwater. We've learned to see water without its complexity, a carry-all waste, flushed down, and kicked away. We decidedly interrupted the notion that water, rivers, tributaries, are an unending being. Yet water is elastic. It's a connector to life, both within and exterior to itself. Thousands, millions, billions of interactions depend on it, and we are by default saturated with its life-giving energies. And with our kin of bacteria, fungi, plants, animals, streams host an extraordinary array of ecologies, holobuoyants, and self-designed ecological communities. But they don't when they're full of sediment like this, which folks in 534 know very well now. To be a gracious host, however, a stream needs to wiggle. It needs to swerve, tumble, breathe, linger, run, dive, burrow, and as a host, it needs to individuate in the company of its rocks, its climate, its valleys and caves. This is streaminess. Without these agencies, the river as a composite being begins to die. 70% of Tennessee's remarkable diversity in freshwater mollusks are either extinct or endangered. These mollusks were both lungs, large and small, for rivers, and were critically important food sources for both Cherokee and Yuchi peoples. And without lungs, without food, what are we? A river's form, the one you can all picture, is not random, nor is it some romantic form born of the picturesque. It is a complex wave, never calculable, tumbling out of relationships to specific gravities, its own atomic structure, and the particulars of its geologic inheritance. A river must slip, strike, fold, flood, move, reform, unsettle, and resettle, and out of its laminations and turbulences flows life. A river's ontology, its streaminess, is therefore made of a paradoxic and semi-bounded mobility. It is in this paradoxic and semi-bounded mobility that this fellowship, a river's dream, indeed a kind of aquatic hallucination, tumbles out of a mixture of drawing, music, and film. Chapter 2, Many-Sided Waters. So I want to step back a little bit and talk about two important ways of seeing water. One, a story of experience. The second, a legal ruling. Both a kind of unlikely inspiration to the philosophy and practices of this fellowship. In 2017, I drove 14 hours through the night to Eastern Oregon. The next morning, I gathered with a bunch of people at the edge of a dammed lake. Nothing big, a local reservoir feeding agriculture, drinking water to nearby Baker City. Surrounded by pines, I kind of waited around the shoreline in wild onions. Other people chattered and scattered about. We were there in the path of totality to watch the solar eclipse. The term totality, however, has come to mean something more broad for me, not just a description of a celestial event, but perhaps a grasping at an idea of connectivity itself, and indeed the connectivity through the animisms of water. Just before the moon embarked on its 3-minute solar blockade, a number of kind of strange things happened. With lumens falling off, the wind ceased. The birds, who had otherwise been going on about their candor, tied up their tongues. Silence. I glanced over the water. There, peripheral to the main show above, I saw what must have been 10,000 fish rising to the surface. One ripple bulldozed by all those other rising snouts, indistinct from every other, and greeting the oncoming darkness to say something of a hyper-celestial hello. The penultimate act portrayed a kind of deference, not to the sun or the moon, but to the envelope, a hypervolume of fullness in absence. That indeed we are all part of an ongoing, fragile, yet inseparable performance, that weather, water, skin, and fin all have no business divided by exceptionalism, but an inscrutable faith in connectivity. The totality of the experience was enough to suffocate reason, to silence explanation from a kind of forensic appetite. Rather, the totality of this envelope, the weight of the experience, expressed itself with the realization that our stage is indeed very, very small, and the distance between one thing to another, these tiny fish and the moon, we are all together in one room. Beings, mineral balls, bodies in orbit, frantic hydrogens clamped to oxygen, considerable and at times inconsiderate dancers, blocking, shaking out our co-revolutions in witness of the other. Distinct, yet indivisible. A stage so small, yet vastly inscrutable. A tiny cipher that we can witness but not truly see within our murky surroundings. The second event came fairly recently, just last year. The U.S. Supreme Court ruled in favor of Sackett versus the Environmental Protection Agency. The Sackett family in 2007 filled in a wetland with gravel a few hundred feet from an existing lake in Idaho. They intended to build a house to replace this wetland. The EPA ruled, using the Clean Water Act and legal definition of the waters of the United States, quote, basically, it's a precedential kind of protection based on navigable use, that they had to remove the gravel and the wetland should be federally protected. The Sacketts argued that the wetland was in fact disconnected by dry land and that permanent navigable waters did not connect the two, and therefore the filled-in wetland was no part of any federal protection. The Supreme Court in 2013, or in 2023 rather, sided with the Sacketts. The ramifications of this ruling will have damaging effects for wetlands across the United States. Wetlands indeed are ephemeral by nature. Water moves in all sorts of ways. The permanence of water, connecting one body to another, is only one way of describing connectivity between them. Far from seeing the wetland or the lake as a composite being, the Supreme Court further narrowed the legal conception of these life-forming waters and gutted a significant tenet of the Clean Water Act in so doing. This is just a little example of what this kind of means at a local level. This is my where I live on my landlord's property. On the bottom left is a little termite bait trap. During a flood event, you can see the termite bait is literally bathing in water, and some of that inevitably will move downstream. If we look at the EPA's label, quote, toxic to aquatic invertebrates and possibly to fish. This ends up in storm drains and it directly moves out into First Creek. This is the pipeline that we live in. So these two examples, the eclipse experience and the Supreme Court ruling, sit amongst two kinds of cosmologies. On one side lies something akin to animist thinking or Gestalt theory, that the togetherness of things or radical interdependency pours out from a kind of paraphysical deference and a reciprocity between something larger and structural and something smaller, atomist beings which kind of substantiate this overall structure. We can see this in the paradoxy of the filter-feeding mollusk. It needs a clean river to breathe and eat, yet the river needs the mollusk as its cleaning agent. We simply cannot separate the two. together they are part of one being of streaminess. And in the case of the Supreme Court ruling on the other side, we see a kind of protective essentialism. That thing exists to the deference of the atomized individual. Private property, fences, ditches, spatial agents of division. This worldview posits that our properties, our buildings, highways, and in this case the Sackett's development desires, exist outside of a duty of care to the larger hydrosphere, and that humanity is, at best, independent or absolved from responsibility to the life ways of the property's ancient, if ephemeral waters. At worst, in the long run, I believe, the ruling erodes a cultural conception that water is alive and unending, and masks connections between what, at first glance, seems small, insignificant, and independent, such as this gravel pit in the house. What pours out of this essentialism, then, is a belief that things in the world, wetlands, rivers, mollusks, us, are spontaneously active and have little, no a priori meaning or inheritance, that they will continue because we are here. This form of essentialism has rapidly accelerated within colonialism and modernity, and underbeds our ordinances, laws, design strictures, and often looks more like a practical solution. The floods and freshets that tore through the Tennessee Valley like that in 1867 left a region reeling with pain. Dams would help, and they did. But in that moment, moreover in this moment, I wish to ask what else we are damming out. What composite being is waiting behind those walls? Indeed, a channelized stream, a dam, a Supreme Court ruling is one means to short-term survival. In the long run, however, I believe our cultural curiosities, our design cultures, ought to peek behind these boundaries of kin, language, waters, and see who is waiting, that we might rise up to the surface and meet our new moon. 3, totality. Like a river, we are composite, yet always in a state of recomposition. We are hyper-absorptive, spongy beings. I continually encounter the tributaries of thought that lead back to something beyond myself. A formative essay, an inspiring project, some piece of poetry, and more often than not, a piece of music. These are supposed to be books. They don't really look like books, but... And music is a great cultural carrier. Music holds you. It doesn't let you forget. It gateways you in, puts you on a cycle, and asks you to stay with the trouble. Thank you, Donna Haraway. It is a kind of wild current which Gary Schneider, the beat poet, says is the bobcat running through your dream right now. Music lets us dream alone and together. It's certainly why proponents of Gestalt theory, Werdemeyer, Senior and Junior, or contemporary philosophers, Jan Zawicki, that's my shout out to Canada here, use the idea of music and the enactment of its performance as the carrier of their own arguments to validate the notion that meaning of the whole is greater than the parts within. I'm quoting now from Jan's book, The Experience of Meaning, which I highly recommend. Some wholes are indeed mere aggregates, yet others are like marshes or forests or lyric poems in the process of being composed, structures all of whose aspects are in dynamic interrelation with one another and with the whole. In such wholes, the interdetermining response and co-response of distinguishable parts is at least as apparent, at least as discernible as the shifting, integrated whole that is, at any moment, being realized through their presence. However, the unfolding symphony performance, no less than the marsh, is an integrated ensemble in which each part has a place, or functions in a way that enables the whole to be stably what it is. Unquote. Ceremony starts with song. This is common across every culture, a football game or a salmon blessing. And ceremonies, rituals, are cultural negotiations we make between space, time, and kin. If we were to renovate our understandings of water, to find what's behind the walls, and to rebuild the river as a hyper-connected being, how can music, in and out of formal and informal ceremony and ritual, take up that animism as a vehicle to propagate curiosity and ecological connectivity? I'm just going to make a kind of asterisk or side note on this, that when I'm using the word animism, I do so with some trepidation and with great deference out of my kind of own thinness of reach with it, that in using it here should no way equate to the ancient and deep epistemologies of indigenous cultures or Mayanistic or Buddhist philosophies. If we're to renovate our understandings of water, we need movement and activism through democratic means, through courts, through local legislative bodies, through national administrations. But that activism, that movement, is always stronger from a root of culture. And maybe, through the voice of a river, this activism takes up residency as music in our ceremonies and spaces, which is kind of why we're here today, hopefully. 4, Holoboyance at work. In the fall of 2022, I came here, as Gail said, in mid-late August, and I came here as a fellow, knowing little about the region, even though I was named after a fictitious Unionist soldier from Harlan County, Kentucky, about 2 hours away. The first studio I taught, Audiolog was the title, took students on a journey circling around and through Tennessee, investigating the region through the lens of music, sound, and aural imagination. Rather than leaning into stereotype, the studio asked students to use combinations of sound, ceremony, and design to build connections to sites, cultures, territories, seeing landscape architecture as a continuum or a bridge into the space of arts and culture. During that studio, UT fellow alum Jeremy Magner alerted me to the music of a certain Knoxvillian, a musician that wrote murder ballads for Mind Off Mountaintops, submerged TVA town sites, and who also, as it turned out, was an angler and a voice of the river. That person is sitting next to my right, down here in the front row, Daniel Kimbrough. In an interest to see where the convergence of music, conservation, design, and activism end up, well, we're here tonight to perform that for you. What emerged from our conversations was twofold. One, I asked Daniel, not an easy task, to write a song about Knoxville's first creek, which he's going to perform in a minute. 2, that he would help accompany me a kind of larger soundtrack for a film called A River's Dream. So this is a kind of collective cornering of first creakiness. How does a musician go about speaking for the voice of a river? How does a design draw out a kind of riparian hallucination? 5, A River's Dream and Introduction. Knoxville's first creek, is termed a creek, but I've always not always, but come to know it maybe as something more substantial. Walking through it, especially in its lower reaches, before it hits Fort Loudon Lake, feels like a river to me. I've used this river moniker in that title to kind of extinguish this diminutive form, and indeed to title it A River's Dream, which is a portmanteau of Alan Say's A River Dream and Kieran Haltenberg's Mississippian photo essay, River's Dream. Along and up into the reaches of First Creek, we see radical shifts in the creek's composition and surroundings. Its body contorts with sublime concrete chasms into serene woods, and its headwaters are filled through serpentine suburban culverts, limestone springs, and groundwater seeps. Daniel and I climbed down into this a couple weeks ago. We didn't do anything illegal, but that river doesn't want you in it. It's not meant for you to be there. It's very difficult to get there, and parts of it you literally can't. We tried to cross James White Highway and decided that you have 2 kids and you need to go home for dinner, and we will live another day and try to find some way to get to its sense of being. This culminating dream sequence of the film is an ongoing enterprise. However, it kind of currently exists as a few things. It's many, many sketched out vignettes of life and design colliding. It all, I'll just say, took form in an A5 sketchbook. 140 some odd storyboards to formally sequence these vignettes. stop motion creatures to animate certain parts of the things that are moving in these sequences. A day's filming with Daniel and First Creek, accompanying, ultimately music and score. 800-word verse that I wrote, which is then voiced and recorded by my colleague Thina. The process began principally as getting to know it. I felt entirely unequipped to say something about this place. So the question was, who are you, First Creek? I walked it, drove around it, went for late-night bike rides beside it. I clambered into it, into this being with my boots, and looked down from wherever I could. I took students there to sketch, photographed its ups and downs. I made field recordings of the wetlands that sit along its riparian edges to identify who might be calling. I sat myself in front of source texts, which inferred at the grand speciation that probably once was hosted by the river, and that hopefully, maybe, one day it might host again. With these books I drew, one after another, to make a kind of portraiture of the band members of this stream. Big to small, fluffy to slimy, the drawings allowed me to begin to dream with a cast of characters who, in their own agencies and their own skill, insofar as I can both literally and mythically imagine, might take part in a rebuilding of a broken stream. And how, in concert with First Creek, these can be seen as through a kind of compound lens, not a thing, but a manyed thing, full water, hollow buoyant, and multiverse, a composite being. Aside from some maps made through kind of aerial raster experimentation, I pretty much just hand drew. This kind of came out of a form of expediency for me in a way. I'm gonna go through this. Not out of a technical ease, because I should just say that it's forever a struggle to draw, but rather to generate narrative and recursive elasticity, to double back, to erase, to retrofit, to modify, without the inertia of digital casting. You can all disagree with me on that. That's fine. In hand drawing, for me, however, I can eddy, swirl amongst the scales, and draw out long and migrating paths of visual development. It is not the most elegant process at times, but I think it works. Between sketches and storyboards, a sequence developed that illuminated a dream spread across 5 sites. First, a prototypical urban site, and to follow 4 very specific moments in the city. These are some James White designs, which you'll see in a minute in the film. As an extension of previous work I've completed through design, I've inquired into the mythic nature relationships between urban animals and humans, such as this exhibition, Wild Things at the Museum of Vancouver. And in this, a river's dream kind of writes from the voice of many beings, activist animals, if you will, who propagate out a chain reaction of spatial events up and down a river. Rewilding and flooding certain sections, excavating, reusing, and adapting extant urban infrastructures for polycivic and multi-species congregation, connecting historically segregated communities and inviting peoples and species back who have historically been walled off from participating within the city's future. I'm now going to invite my friend Daniel Kimbrough, who can speak a little bit about his process and will lead you into the next part of the evening.
Thanks, Chad. I think some of the things I had planned to say, Chad may have covered, but I just want to reiterate that we met through Jeremy Magner. I was here in this room 2 years ago. I thought it was a year ago. It was 2 years ago. Jeremy gave a presentation, and I was really moved by it, and that led to a couple of copy conversations between Jeremy and myself. And I have been, I think what's the appropriate word? Just the time away from touring musician life that lockdown provided was important for me, and it was a reflective time, and a realization flowed that was, how can I integrate my conservation concerns more into the things that I present to the public as a musician. So I think maybe that was somewhere in mind. I think Jeremy mentioned to Chad that something about me, and then Chad and I were having coffee. So my history with First Creek goes back quite a long way. I remember catching my first fish at the mouth of First Creek, and knowing since I was in high school, my dad worked at Baptist Hospital across the river, which is now some apartments and I don't know what else. But we always saw folks fishing over there, and I knew that he had fished there at the mouth. And usually confluences are places where people, or rather where fish, get together and can be perhaps concentrated and active enough in an eat of feeding state that means that we might catch them. I caught a skipjack, which is not a sought-after fish. Some people, old-timers around here, call those river herring. They used to smoke them for food, and they're big and slimy and quite ugly, and they bleed all over you. I did not intend to be so graphic. This is a good time to remind you to silence your cell phones once again. But I came to be aware of a nonprofit here in Knoxville called Conservation Fisheries Incorporated, which is CFI. They're better known as, and did some volunteer work with them, cleaning out their tanks, and they sort of husband over marginalized micro fishes in the Appalachian area. These include things like tangerine darters or log perch, and they've even fostered animals from abroad and far-flung places. And so I went snorkeling with some CFI staff at one point and was able to go see just exactly what sort of biodiversity exists in inches of water, let alone feet. And that was really, really intense for me. And so the love of things unseen and perhaps uncelebrated just kept being fueled. And that's where my conservation impetus comes from. And just want to say thanks for the opportunity to Chad and to Jeremy and to Gail. And I hope that the song hits you in the right way. I always hope that. I hope I don't get too obsessed about the performance of it and rather just focus on delivering it. But I do want to say that a lot of the information was informed. There's a great local historian. Those of you that have been in Knoxville for a while might know of Jack Neely. And Jack used to write for a paper that was here called the Metropulse, which is an independent newspaper. And Jack still has a website and blog that he maintains. And First Creek was possibly originally known as Cripple Creek, and I want to provide that context because I think it's important to know why I'm using the word cripple in this case. Cripple Creek also, I grew up with my family here in East Tennessee, learning Appalachian music and playing and performing eventually a lot of Appalachian music in some very Appalachian places. And Cripple Creek is a song. It's also a very popular instrumental banjo melody. And going up to Cripple Creek, going at a run, going up to Cripple Creek to have a little fun was a constant refrain at Bluegrass Jams. And this is not the Cripple Creek that First Creek is. It's one in or near Wytheville, Virginia. But I thought that was an interesting parallel. And Cripple Creek was called First Creek rather was called Cripple Creek because of the way that it meandered amongst the willows before its confluence with the Tennessee River. And it was most likely, as most streams in Appalachia are, until we people get involved. It was probably painstakingly beautiful and full of a lot of really colorful organisms. So anyway, that context I think is important for the film and for the song. I don't think there was anything else I wanted to say, Chad. I just want to tune real quick before we roll the thing, and that's about it. Oh, no, some guy with a crazy mustache asked me to try a little harder. Seth, you all set? Okay. I want to reiterate my gratitude for Seth Hopper, Knoxville's finest audio engineer and second finest violinist.
Old water runs down from a fountainhead, washes your efforts in sheets from his bed. You take what you will, and then you throw it away. The creek bides his time, he's flowing away. Straighten out the bends, pave o'er the rocks, build a shopping cart reef, catch bags that block out the sun. Now sediment seeps like an old man crippled, the first of your creeks. Hack down the willows, build butcher shops, lay down your pillows, unload your crops, lay your tracks for profit prey. The creek bides his time, he's flowing away. Sometimes it rains and you can hear him roar like an L&N train along the valley floor. He'll clean the bottoms of all of your reek like an old man crippled, the first of your creeks. Clear out the color of scales and skin, no room for the others of the fish or the men. Whitewash it all down to the clay. The creek bides his time, he's trickling away. The poor folks love water, they can let it go. Rich folks love fodder like litter loves a road. Water loves a rock to carve smooth and sleek. He can heal the crippled, the first of your creeks. Some see a diamond in the nation's soul, four corners aligned between two poles. Bring folks to cheer, bring folks to pay. The creek bides his time, he's going away. Some see a time when the concrete rots, new willows climb, new fish are caught. From a stream so bright as a heron's beak, no longer crippled, the first of your creeks. The whole water runs down from a fountainhead, washes your efforts in sheets from his bed. Take what you will, and then you throw it away. The creek bides his time, he's winding away. The creek bides his time, he's winding away.
We don't really know where life came from. Something to do with water. Murky, not revealing secrets. But a chord was struck, 1,000 of our tiny breaths, our bubbles, 1 billion even smaller, and out came a river's dream. We fly across the urban skin, pulled watertight. We float over your lost credit cards. Our whispers bounce, bound, and beckon. We're a river, we ought to breach, to widen, to flood with life and chance. We crow, crane, dig, furrow, flinch, flow through the urban re-renewal. The banks wax and smile, unbraced. Our cheeks flood, swollen, flushing and seizing suburban particles. This was the storefront, our home, the pantry, the bedding. A mask unfurled, a new bloom. A river's dream, reversing the foreclosure on the freedom to flow. To survive, a freshwater mollusk must first incubate in the gill of a fish. I only exist because you do. I only exist because you do. I only exist because you do. A river's dream, to liquefy the state of all things. Teeth cut earth, a packaged wrapped, decamped upstream. What we mind away leaves a lumpy hollow, a new river's lung. A resting place for upstream commuters. Decanting diesel and atrazine, the first of many amphitheaters. A still shadow the river always runs from. We mutter in the humid hour, open for business. Let's call this staging a first flight, a waiting room with a welcome sign, eddying in the sidecar currents blaring, vacancy and help wanted. A river's dream, leave-taking, straight up the grid, over the ridge, above the traffic jams, past the house cats and foggy ashtrays, over the arches just below the fountain in the weepy lime. There we'll meet our new engineer, prepared, savvy, always ready to cut the new rights from the old. Incisors who lift waters, furry moons for landlocked river gardens. In the leftover figuration of a marmot's burrow, the beaver sees other possibilities, not the holes and lifting ties of a snake rod as sees the eagle, but mortices of more permanence for oak and elder. A coordinated affair, the eagle crane lowers the new dam in place, pinned to the specific geometries of a day's falling. Whip-sawed between talons and ironed buck teeth, the deck unfurls. A dam is a bed, a beach, a stage. A river's dream, amphibial trap rooms, labyrinths who host chance and chase. 4 of our tiny feet, following 8. disappearing acts, cameos, logged rhythm, and death rhymes. For a moment, our two beaks wrestle as we pass over the morning drive. Are we a thankless meal, or the Mergansers' mercenaries? Death from above, or migrants dropped to cut new veins and floodplains? A rivered ditch is no place for a Helgramite. We need clean, winding rivers, bedded with polished gems. I'll cut my way through, enough for others to turn the table. A river's incontinent swells into the steps and stoops of our new neighbors. The flood is a song rising. Tenant caves mirrored above and below the flood line. We now have a port of entry into the karst kingdom. An alluvial balcony under the feet of the concrete dwellers. Side channel riffles, play space, an imperfect, if durably paved floodplain. A frantic freshet washed and jammed with cut lips in fluid fever. Down, down, down. Destruction or creation, shrapnel groves, light and lightning now find our wrinkles, 50 years buried and undying. Communities yearning to set foot and flipper across the power broker's chasm. In the remains out walks a kudzu caterpillar, tiptoeing the tightrope between places separated, attacked. Our 20-legged stanchions wed and ford the new river, and our saddlebags fluff out. From up here, it's harder to make out the divided city. diaphanous, dynamic, a re-rivered, re-bridged valley finds center in every direction. We slither between concrete, under storefronts, houses and gardens, dappling light into pools of oak and poplar. We pounce into vernal ooze, harbored in the ruins of a generation's idol. In the wake of re-renewal, maybe we call others back, into harvest and into ceremony. Kin wiggle beneath feet, and at their gaze meets family. A river's dream, an entreaty. We float by, we submerge in curiosity. Some are beyond reach, while others take risk in the face of unreasonable danger. But grace sometimes calls. The table is set, and in communion, everything that dies must first live. A river's dream is to run through all of us.
I just want to say the reason that my guitar shorted out is because I took it into a creek.
I don't know if there are questions, but not getting late.
He said, does anybody have any questions?
Thanks so much to both of you. It seems impossible to ask a question right now, so
You don't have to ask.
instead, I'll take the yoke, if you will, of the audience and try to ask one. I was thinking of a couple things in the last half hour or so. One is that I've read that my bloodstream and your bloodstream and everyone's bloodstream in the room contains PFOA,
Yep.
synthetic byproduct, if you will, of Teflon.
Yep.
And that's in the bloodstream of every living creature on the planet.
Even polar bears. Yeah.
And that no matter what I do, I'm not going to scrub that, nor the microplastics, nor any
any of those things out of my bloodstream. That was one kind of constant thing I had to bring. The other was about trickster characters, and about like the behavior of trickster characters in narratives, the relationship of both the spoken word, the song, etc. And if any of the characters involved in either of those places might have tricksterity to them, if you say, if I might. So the trickster might misbehave. It might act in an absurdist fashion in order to elicit behavior from others that would start to kind of produce other effects on the other end of it. So like if I'm grappling with the fact that I will simply never escape my coupling with synthetic shit in the world, and kind of also holding out hope that there's other possibilities out there. I wonder like if tricksterism or tricksterity might be a thing relative to any of the animal creatures, to the way that you construct narrative, to the way that you deploy sound. Anything?
Yeah, I think first two things, if you live in eastern parts of North Carolina, you're really worried about PFAS. Not so much here. If you live downstream in Alabama, you're really worried about those things. We're lucky to not be in major contamination sites where those things have been introduced as much. They're still here, but it's not as big of a deal as just in the peripheries of this region. I think the trickster comment is just amazing and really important to ask. A lot of, I mean, if you look at Cherokee myths, the ones that I was able to read from like early contact and so forth, the trickster is always there. There's not a sense, the mythic and kind of animistic storytelling is not Pollyannish. It's not everything is all good, the animals are wonderful, nothing bad ever happens. There's always misfortune and a kind of cultural learning that comes from people coming across different, or animals coming across different divides from one another. And so it's something I really thought a lot about in terms of making the storyboards and thinking about how these creatures are there, how they battle one another. You know, there's cooperation and competition in nature. And I think that's seen all over First Creek, and I think we certainly saw
100%.
First Creek.
Yeah.
So I don't have a great answer for you there, other than to say that what we learn from animals and our relationship to them, and ultimately this composition, is that it's not a thing without struggle. It's I think we have to have myths that are difficult and uncomfortable to read and to work within, and that calls us as designers, people who are drawing, to pull those in to sort of give us guidance. I think that's ultimately what we're trying to work towards. Is like how is design both a guidance as an ordinance, but then also guidance from a cultural perspective. So.
Did you have any specific characters from a myth or folk legends that were kind of intensely present in your mind?
I don't think so. In fact, I actively did not want to go there. In my professional work, I've done a lot of work with indigenous stakeholders and representatives, and those are their stories to tell, and they're not my stories to tell. So this was I think just probably actually just should mention that there was almost no consultation in this, and that's not the way I would typically work as a designer, but it was more of a kind of personal body-to-body rumination, hallucination, rather than something where I was actively seeking input, because I don't think I had time, I didn't have the ability to meaningfully do that, and I certainly didn't have the ability to decode stories that are not my own to tell. So. Oh, sorry, microphone. I won't repeat that.
Can you say the exact thing you said about trickster stuff again, please? I'm always adopting I'm always playing a character when I'm writing or performing. It's a survival mechanism, and I think of that person that I try to inhabit whenever I do anything musical as very much a used car salesman. And that takes just enough pressure off of it for me to give myself permission to write something that might mean something to somebody else, because that feels really pretentious to me. So I think of being a musician very much as being an acting gig. So I don't know who that character person is, but he's really, really a trickster. And I don't know if that's what your question actually meant, but that's how I'm answering it.
I have a question.
Faye.
It's more just for you all to talk maybe a little bit more about your process of collaboration.
Totally.
Like, did the music come first, and then the animations, or
Yeah.
Because it seems like there's two parts to it as well. So.
Yeah, thanks for asking that, because it's something that I sort of meant to hit on before. Projects like this, in my experience, are always sort of a concentric circle of one person provides a certain idea, and then there's feedback given, or the filtering of one person's idea through another person's head or ears is a hell of a thing, and so inevitably, and Chad and I talked about how this was always going to be the kind of thing where it's a little bit he sends me something and a little bit I send him something and a little bit, and it might not come, it's going to be panicky because it's going to be, a few days before, and we're still going to be like, not because necessarily of procrastination, and not because of the obsessive editing kind of procrastination, which feels productive, but it's not. But very much the vision should be mutable based upon the other team members' inputs, because that's what listening is, whether it's a conversation that's actually grammatical or musical. So that's my interpretation of what our process was. It was very much, screenshots of, or just literally photographs of pages from his A4 notebook, and I would, the first iteration of the song was, of course, a voice memo, from a hotel room in Denver.
That's important to mention that he wrote that on the road, tired, burnt out.
Well, burnout for sure, but that's just musician life.
I think I would just jump in and say that Daniel has a really interesting way of strategically withholding his, and I say that as a compliment, and trusting the process, really trusting the process. I think you used this term yesterday, that eventually these two sides of the helix will eventually meet, which is today, because I hadn't seen, or rather heard, any of the kind of, not any, but certainly some amount of the invention that you brought forward today. So I think it's a trust building exercise.
100%.
Yeah.
Yes.
I don't know how long you're here in Knoxville. It seems like a courageous endeavor to be involved in this creek and to introduce yourself to it and learn about it. What's your relationship to the creek now, or going forward, or now? How about now?
Well, I would like to keep working with it and keep meeting it. And ultimately, I don't know how the film and the music sit together. Do these storyboards become a fully animated film? Do they become a children's book? Sort of introduced into, I don't know. It would be cool to do something like that. But, I feel like I'm just like right there in terms of a tiny amount of knowing it. And I would love to continue in that. So, not a very good answer, but it's, to stereotype it, I think, is problematic. So, it's hopefully an evolving process. I'll just say, in that one day that we went down there, the place where people aren't allowed, like you just start to see this sublime beauty that is there that no Knoxvillian has access to. And that was a kind of major inspiration, is that it's like, how do we turn the table on this? And so I think, March 13th, the mayor announced that I think they got $43 million in federal funding from the U.S. Department of Transportation. Knoxville is moving through certain steps to reconnect James White. The question is, can First Creek be part of that as well? So I think there's there's so many ways in which we can sort of get to know this creek better.
I had today coffee with a fellow musician who moved here not a super long time ago, a few years ago, and he asked me what I was doing this evening, and I mentioned that Chad and I were presenting this, and it's this, a film about First Creek, and he said, we were sitting at Old City Java, and he said, is that nearby? And I said, it's right there, and nobody knows that it's right there. And like Chad said, when we did find a way to climb down into the channelized area, and once we got past an encampment, and we just, you just started immediately seeing. There was a term that you used, and I can't remember what it was, or maybe it was a sentence you said, something like, just the alluvial processes, even in concrete, they've started, and then geese came swimming by, and it was a really pastoral kind of feeling there. It was a really emotional thing, just to say to all of you, like for me, to start at that grate in that subdivision in Fountain City. And I've been to Fountain City Park, and I understand what Fountainhead Springs and some of the history of First Creek. And I used to live very close to that park, and my two kids played at that park a lot and splashed in that water. And I always told them not to put their hands in their mouths afterwards, and it was just such a thing to then be in that channelized part. And you are, I don't know, what is it, 20 feet, probably? The street level is above you 20 feet, and it's a hell of a thing to be right in the center of downtown and in the center of the baseball stadium construction. Excuse me. And I don't know how to describe what that emotion was like, but it was powerful for sure. I was shook, as my daughter would say. Yeah.
Okay.
Cool. Thanks for being here.
Thank you.